In this video, we will discuss Islamic Scripture. When we talk about Islamic Scripture, there are two main components. The first, and by far the most important, is the Quran, and the second is the Hadith. We'll look at each of these in turn, but if you'd like to know more about the history of Islam, be sure to watch the Origins and History video after or before this video. The Quran is considered the most important body of scripture for Muslims. According to the tradition, it was received by Muhammad in 610 CE. It is considered to be a continuation of the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, just as the Prophet Muhammad, who is considered the seal of the prophets, is understood as a continuation of the prophets Abraham, Moses, and Jesus' work. Quran literally means recitation, and according to the tradition, the angel Gabriel came to the Prophet Muhammad in a cave in Hira and told him to recite, which was considered miraculous because Muhammad would probably have been illiterate. The Quran is understood as a series of revelations from Allah, or God, to Muhammad, who wrote it down over approximately 22 years. The Quran is structured by surah, or chapter, and after this by ayah, or verse. The Quran is not structured chronologically, but rather by what we call the descending length rule. The first chapter of the Quran functions as a type of preface, but after that surah, we see that the second surah is the longest in the Quran and is significantly longer than those that come after. The Quran therefore is set up where the longest of the surah come first and the shortest come last. Because of this, it's difficult to determine what surahs were written when and where. There are two different categories that people usually use when talking about Quranic studies. That there are Meccan surah and Medinan surah. And this simply refers to where the Prophet Muhammad was when he wrote the surah. The first revelation of the Quran is believed by most Muslims to be in Surah 96, verses 1 through 5. Even though Surah 96 does not come first because of this descending length rule, it is believed to be the first of the revelations that we see in the Quran. The Hadith is also an important body of scripture for Muslims. The Hadith is a compilation of the Sunnah, or traditions and customs of Muhammad and the early Muslims. The Sunnah is this body of traditions that exists out there, while the Hadith is a compilation and written down version of these. Hadith is a compilation of things that the Prophet Muhammad or early Muslims said, did, or silently sanctioned. It literally means traditions, and we see this with these collections of things that people heard Muhammad saying or doing, or things that early Muslims did as well, that are considered important and authoritative for the tradition. The Hadith is collected and written down sometime around the 8th century CE, so approximately 100 years after Muhammad's death. Now that we have reached the end of this video, you should be able to identify the two main types of Islamic scripture, explain what the Quran and Hadith are and how they function as scripture, and evaluate why the Quran is the most important text for Muslims.